I'd like to focus on access to high-speed broadband across the Commonwealth. And I think we can all agree that bringing access to the unserved and underserved throughout our state should be a priority, particularly in light of the fact that the federal government is sending us a significant amount of taxpayer resources to close that digital divide, focused on the unserved and the underserved. And as you are aware, a policy statement that was adopted over 2 decades ago by your predecessors bans the construction of new towers and other related broadband infrastructure on state game land. And during drafting conversations for the legislation that was ultimately signed into law as Act 96 of 2021, which created the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority, I brought up the idea of eliminating this moratorium and including state game land as a resource to build, to further deploy high-speed broadband to those incredibly needy areas of the state. And I was told that that wasn't going to happen in that legislation, right? So upholding a complete ban on the siting of new broadband infrastructure on state game lands, I believe is inappropriate given the numerous ways that infrastructure can blend into our natural environments and given the need to help our constituents gain access to broadband internet. Many of the most difficult to reach are located in and around those state game lands. And we know that the state is the largest landowner in the Commonwealth. So if our efforts on the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority are essentially handicapped due to this 2 decades old prohibition, I think we're going to have a lot of people who live in our rural communities who will continue to lack access to high-speed internet. And I know that we have begun to have those conversations, but I'd like to get a better idea of what your department is willing to do to repeal the ban and facilitate bridging our Commonwealth's digital divide.
Sure, absolutely. And I'll be asking, Mike Walsh serves on a broadband team for the governor on this issue, and I'll just make a few comments. One is, looking at public lands in Pennsylvania, there's the game lands, and that's under the management of the Game Commission, which I have no authority on, but on state lands, I think your points all apply to DCNR state forest lands and park lands as well. And so the prohibition was on towers, and frankly, a lot of these towers we're getting requests for were like moving stock quotes from Chicago to New York, no appreciable benefit to the citizens of Pennsylvania. So it was put in place so that the staff and the forest offices who were approached would then elevate it to central office. We've always made the exception for public safety, and we make an exception for broadband. In fact, we have proactively facilitated. Several counties came to us. They had they got a hold of some federal money in one of the last packages, and they wanted to put broadband and cell access on a state park, and they had a limited time window to act, and we facilitated them. We worked with them very closely. It was Fayette and I think Bedford. And there's a couple going up right now that we're in process. One is Waterville. Again, a very important recreational area, Pine Creek Gorge. So we want to put that tower the right place. You don't want it trashing that $1 million view from the Pine Creek Gorge, and we've worked with them and positioned that. And there's one at Ricketts Glen. So if you don't mind, I'll ask Mike Walsh, who sits on the governor's broadband team, to talk about the opportunity. I think the governor and our agency would agree. Our staff, sit in remote offices, trying to push out financial reports and you name it, incident reports. They need good broadband, and our offices, our mechanics, we had a mechanic talk to us about having to go home and download his instructions to fix a certain kind of a fire truck, that you couldn't do at the office. So we recognize the need even in our own staff. So let me just, without more detail, let you talk to Mike.
Thanks, and thank you, Senator, for the question. We share that hope that the Broadband Development Authority, using that $100 million plus, does advance the goals of ensuring 800,000 plus Pennsylvanians get that broadband access that we're talking about. Pennsylvania right now on DCNR lands has 300 towers. Not everybody knows that, 300 towers on DCNR lands today. As the Secretary mentioned, we've facilitated new deployment for broadband in Fayette and Bedford just in the last couple of months with the federal funds, and we're doing the ones she talked about at Waterville and Ricketts Glen. And so there is that moratorium, to your point that you mentioned, from Secretary Oliver in 2000, and it had a public safety exception, and then we've expanded that to a broadband exception in this administration so that we can get exactly to your point, that we can be helpful in those areas. We have lots of things to take into consideration. The Parks and Forest staff meet regularly to discuss applications when and if they come in, because there are a number of factors that need to be taken into consideration. Wetlands, ecological impacts, as well as view sheds that the Secretary mentioned for the Pine Creek Gorge. So we are doing everything we can to be helpful and to advance expansion of broadband deployment in Pennsylvania on our lands wherever we can. And so we're happy to work with you more on that, and with that new authority, we're excited about that legislation.
I appreciate that. Failure is not connecting the unserved and underserved of this Commonwealth after expending massive amounts of federal taxpayer dollars, because as I have said on numerous occasions, the people back home in my district, they don't care if it's federal tax dollars, state tax dollars, local tax dollars, it all comes out of the same wallet for them. So we need to make sure that we get those people in our most rural areas that are interspersed in state-owned lands connected, and look forward to having your assistance in making that happen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, a second round.